At the beginning of 1941, the neutral Kingdom of Yugoslavia was in a critical and complex political position. By that time, Germany had occupied all of Western and Central Europe and was preparing to attack Greece through Romania and Bulgaria, thereby consolidating its positions in the Mediterranean and providing a direct supply line for Rommel's army on the North African front. With the accession of Bulgaria to the Axis powers at the beginning of March 1941, the Kingdom of Yugoslavia found itself in a complete encirclement. In an effort to preserve neutrality and avoid war, the Yugoslav government began negotiations with the German Reich, and on March 25th, a protocol on Yugoslavia's accession to the Triple Pact was signed in Vienna. Just 2 days later, on March 27th, a group of officers carried out a coup d'état, replaced the government, declared the coming of age of the King Peter II, and handed over power to him. The people across Serbia supported and welcomed this event with demonstrations. The only support for Yugoslavia for such a political development of events came from the government of Great Britain, which at that time stood alone against Nazi Germany. All efforts of the new Yugoslav government, led by General Dusan Simovic, to prevent hostilities with the German Reich through negotiations were in vain. Hitler, who was in a hurry to occupy Greece as soon as possible and expel the British forces that were there, got a good reason and excuse for attacking Yugoslavia, in rejecting the protocol on joining the pact. Even without the coup, Germany would certainly not have allowed Yugoslavia to enjoy the neutrality stipulated by the protocol, primarily because of the necessary supply line for Rommel's forces in North Africa, but also because of the exploitation of ores of crucial importance for the German military industry. Then the German decision was made to carry out an attack on Yugoslavia in addition to the already planned attack on Greece. Such simultaneous attack would have prevented the withdrawal of the Yugoslav army and the creation of a joint Yugoslav-Greek-British defensive front, as happened in the First World War. The plan to attack Yugoslavia was given the code name Directive No. 25 and was linked to the plan to attack Greece under the code name Marita. The Germans were well aware of the situation in the country and the army. The disunited Yugoslav society, affected by the internal political crisis, burdened by the growing nationalist and separatist aspirations, called into question the success of the mobilization itself. For a part of the non-Serb population, the fight for the defense of Yugoslavia could not be expected. The Germans counted that the Croats would be on the German side during the attack, and in return through Ustasha emigration they were guaranteed a suitable political order and the creation of the independent state. In addition, the incomparably smaller number and modest technical capabilities of the Yugoslav army provided the superior German military force with an easy victory. For these reasons, the strategy of attacking Yugoslavia was a relatively simple task. In order to deliver a serious psychological blow to the start of war operations, a brutal bombardment of Belgrade and other cities were planned. At the same time, massive air attacks are planned for the bombing of airports and communications on the lines of possible retreat of the Yugoslav army towards Greece. The attack of the ground motorized forces was planned simultaneously from several directions with the aim of isolating and neutralizing the units with strong and fast comprehensive maneuvers before organizing and forming a unified defensive front. The Second German Army had the task of making a breakthrough towards Zagreb from the north and continuing its advance towards Sarajevo, thus isolating the Yugoslav troops in the western part of the country. At the same time, motorized troops from Hungary would advance towards Belgrade in a rapid penetration through Vojvodina. The main planned strike was to be carried out from Bulgaria, and after breaking through the front, one part would advance towards Niš and continue towards north on Belgrade, and the other part would make a breakthrough towards Macedonia and continue the advance towards northern Greece. Germany's faithful ally, Fascist Italy, also had its planned role for the attack on Yugoslavia. The Italian army concentrated its forces for an attack from the direction of Istria, along the Slovenian coast and from northern Albania. The attack on Yugoslavia was supposed to be carried out without a temporary declaration of war. In the early morning hours of April the 6th, German aviation attacked the larger cities of Belgrade, Niš, Leskovac, Kragujevac, Mostar, Banja Luka, and Novi Sad. The main attack, under the command of the German general Alexander von Lehr, was carried out on Belgrade, and the operation was called Punishment. Devastating aerial bombing were carried out on the undefended city and the surprised population. Large quantities of bombs were dropped on the residential areas and important buildings, which caused great destruction and huge casualties. On that occasion, the National Library was burned to the ground, where books of priceless cultural values were burned. The attacks were repeated during the night of 6th to 7th April and continued during the day, and it's estimated that over 10,000 citizens lost their lives. Only the 6th Fighter Regiment sacrificed itself in the defense of the undefended city, which managed to shoot down a dozen German aircraft in an unequal battle even before its destruction. The attack of the German ground forces from the north was carried out by the Second Army from two directions, from Austria and Hungary. Since the Second Army was not yet in full force on the day of the attack, the invasion was launched by the 46th Armored Corps northwest of Belgrade. The defense in this sector was held by units with soldiers of Croatian nationality. The Germans did not encounter any resistance during the invasion, but were greeted as allies by the Croatian soldiers. Then there was an open rebellion of the Croatian reservists and officers in this sector. Already on April the 8th, the entire 108th Infantry Regiment in Bjelovar revolted and joined the Ustasha. The Ustasha rebels tried to capture the headquarters of the 4th Yugoslav Army commanded by the General Petar Nedeljković. The rebellion spread to the other units, the entire 40th and part of the 42nd Infantry Regiment. Croats left their units en masse, joined the Ustasha, carried out diversions and sabotage, and eventually captured and killed Serbian officers and soldiers. The war on the northern and northwestern fronts ended in 4 days. Already on April the 10th, the Germans entered Zagreb, where they were enthusiastically welcomed by the people of Zagreb, and on the same day the independent state of Croatia was proclaimed. The majority of Croatian officers immediately made themselves available to the newly formed Croatian state. Of the senior officers, 31 generals, 228 colonels, 245 lieutenant colonels, 254 majors, 1005 captains, and 417 lieutenants joined the Ustasha army. Even before the start of the war, the Croats were making preparations for subversive action. Matrix protectors were armed from the military warehouses, and they regularly went to combat training conducted by officers of Croatian nationality at the military training grounds, completely openly without interference or prohibitions. The main attack on Yugoslavia was carried out by the 12th German Army from Bulgaria, which was there earlier because of the planned attack on Greece. It was the best equipped German army that participated in the attack on Yugoslavia. Already in the first 2 days, the German forces accomplished their main task. The Moravian Vardar Valley was cut, thus preventing the withdrawal of the Yugoslav army to the south and joining forces with the Allies in Greece. Already on April the 7th, the Germans occupied Skopje, and the parts of the German army continued their advance towards Albania to meet the Italian forces. Thus, with this lightning attack, the southern direction of the deviation was completely cut off, and the Yugoslav forces in Macedonia remained isolated and cut off. On the Nišava front, the Yugoslav army put up somewhat tougher resistance, but they could not withstand the German attacks for long. Already on April the 8th, the Germans entered Niš, Aleksinac, and Hražanj, and continued their advance to the north. This opened the way for the Germans towards Belgrade, into which the German army marched 5 days later, on April the 13th. The Italian army attacked, exactly as planned, from Istria and along the Slovenian coast in one side, and from behind from Albania on the other. From April the 8th to 13th, the Zeta division fought against the Italian army on the Albanian border and at one point pushed back the attackers in the direction of Shkodër. The unfavorable situation on other fronts forced the division to withdraw, in which it suffered considerable losses from the rebellious Albanian population. The military airfields that were not destroyed in the first raid with a few remaining planes did not pose any serious threat to the Germans. Except in a few individual cases, there were no combat activities. Commanders of bomber and fighter regiments of Croatian nationality did not carry out war missions but most often surrendered and transferred to the Ustasha army. Sabotages contributed to the rapid collapse of the Yugoslav army. For example, the river flotilla headed by the battleship captain Edgar Angeli and his chief of staff frigate captain Boris Storov significantly helped the insurgent German group during the attack on the Sip Canal on the night of April the 5th and 6th. According to the Hitler's order, the Volksdeutsches not only did not respond to the mobilization, but also carried out various sabotages, sent information about the movement and deployment of the army to the German intelligence centers, spread misinformation and caused panic among soldiers and citizens. Even before the war, there was a well-organized fifth column among the Volksdeutsche which successfully operated from the inside, causing damage, chaos, and confusion. Regardless of the hopeless and catastrophic situation on all fronts, many officers resolutely and courageously stood up for the defense of the country. Officers' honor, sworn oath, and patriotic feelings motivated many Serbian officers and soldiers to a desperate and self-sacrificing fight against a superior enemy. There are numerous examples of individual and collective heroism regardless of the odds of victory. Sometimes consciously sacrificing their lives, officers and soldiers fought until their last breath. The brave pilots of the 6th Aviation Regiment defended the sky over Belgrade, achieved a dozen aerial victories, and almost all of them perished in the unequal battle. An example of almost epic heroism was the sinking of the destroyer Zagreb, when two young lieutenants of the battleship Milan Spasic and Sergei Masera blew up their ship so that it would not fall into the hands of the Italians. And on that occasion they consciously sacrificed their lives. There were cases when officers, disappointed by a quick defeat, preferred death to the shameful surrender and going into captivity. The high command of the Yugoslav army did not control the situation from the first day of the invasion. After the fall of Belgrade on April the 13th and a clear military breakdown, there was also a crisis of the government, which was then located in Pale near Sarajevo. It was then decided that for the sake of the greater security, the king and the government would be moved to Nikšić and from there transferred to Greece by plane, and General Danilo Kalafatović was appointed as the head of the Supreme Command. 2 days later, on April the 15th, the Germans entered Sarajevo and they captured the headquarters of the Supreme Command and General Kalafatović. 2 days later, on April the 17th, the Yugoslav officers signed the orders on the implementation of the armistice. From a legal point of view, this document was not binding, especially since it was signed by the captured officers General Radivoje Janković and Aleksandar Cincar Marković. This document determined the unconditional surrender of all officers and soldiers, complete weapons, equipment, draft and cargo cattle, as well as all assets of the land, army, navy and aviation. In addition, the handover of archives, all military documents, plans and other files related to the army was ordered. A strict prohibition was indicated leaving the country. The Germans perceived these provisions as unconditional capitulation, so that any further resistance or military organization was considered a rebellion outside the law and norms of international law. And on the occasion of such activities, all possible repressions would be justified. According to the provisions of the agreement, the Germans treated non-surrendered soldiers as frontierer, and in accordance with the order of the German General Staff of June 17, 1938, provided by the harshest regime towards them. According to Velimir Terzic research, around 375,000 officers, non-commissioned officers and soldiers were captured. The prisoners were treated differently so that the Germans saw Serbs, some Slovenes and only those they knew to be strongly Yugoslav-oriented as real prisoners. Officers and soldiers of Croatian nationality were not captured, and if they were soon released. Macedonians, Montenegrins, and various minorities had a similar status. After the release of the various categories of prisoners, including sick prisoners of Serbian nationality, about 200,000 officers and soldiers were interned in prison camps. Due to the destruction or capture of Yugoslav war documents and due to the lack of interest of post-war researchers, there are no approximate data on the number of officers and soldiers killed in the April War. The outdated and poorly led Yugoslav army found itself unprepared in a war with the most modern and at the same time the most brutal army in the world.